Mvskoke and Stonko. Welcome back to another episode of Live Wire, where we answer your questions. My name is Braden Harper, and I will be your host for today. The topic of discussion for today is Native American education and history. Joining us today on the Live Wire is a Mvskoke Creek citizen who specializes in Native American topics through Zoom lessons. Those topics include representation in media, myth and legend, as well as, of course, history, Miss Joy Sweger. Miss Sweger, welcome to Live Wire.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so looking forward to the interview today.
Yes, indeed. Now, for those of you out there in the audience, don't forget you can chime in with your own questions. Simply submit them in the chat box located on the right-hand side of this video window, and we will answer those questions about halfway through the show. So, without further ado, let's get started. Ms. Sweger, tell us about your education and personal background.
I was born my parents were living in Catoosa at the time I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We ended up moving when I was about 5 or 6 years old to Bixby, Oklahoma, where my mother was born on the bank of the river there. My grandfather was the first one there, so we have several generations in Bixby. Most people would know where I was living because of the house that was on Memorial that we lived in. And from there, I graduated from Bixby High School. Only 125 people. I just saw they're going to build a new one for 2,000. Wow. I graduated from Oklahoma State University with an accounting degree. Before I was 60, I obtained my master's in forensic accounting. I have a accreditation in fraud investigation and internal auditing, and my last job was for hospitals. I know a lot about Bixby history, if you want to know anything, because so many generations are there from us. Also, knew nothing about being Native. My grandfather was born in Indian Territory, and my dad was the first Native American citizen born in his family, and he fought in World War II, but he never recognized himself as Native. My great-grandfather was on the Dawes Commission as an interpreter, and he spoke 7 languages. And I know now that my grandfather must have known languages, but he knew my dad never spoke a word nor told me that they were Native. And when he enrolled us in 1974, when I graduated high school and told us we were Native, we asked him why. Why had you never registered? Why did you not tell us? And he said to us, nothing ever good came from being a Native. And that was so sad, but I didn't realize what he meant until I started doing my research and find out so much in history. I've never met anybody that really knew Native history when I do these presentations.
So yes, regarding the history that you teach, it sounds like your journey has been quite vast into Native American history. What was the spark that started that journey?
I'm a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I was asked to do a presentation on Native American boarding schools. And so I started reading, and I was shocked by what had happened and occurred. And I just 10 years later, I'm still shocked by how much went on that we never knew. And I was right there in it and never knew. So I started wanting to, if I didn't know, how many other people didn't know? And what else didn't I know? And so I just snowballed, started reading everything and asking people for stories or tell me anything. And I started asking for stories when I was 5. I used to go to the quilting of my great-grandmother in church and draw the chalk lines so I could hear them tell stories. So I've always loved history. I've always read. I'm tenacious. And the first thing we do when we travel is to look up if there's our library or a museum where we're going. So I just want to set the record straight. I want people to know who we are, what we believe, and what has been happening to us.
Certainly, indeed. Can you tell us about the array of subjects that you teach through your Zoom lessons?
I go into culture and languages. I ask people, is there a certain culture or language they want to know about before I do the presentation for them? Because my point is to have them enjoy the journey and learn something new, and it has to be something they're interested in. So I try to gear my presentations to something they're interested in. I have to break it down because I only get 20 or 30 minutes. I do culture and language, and then I do Native American treaties and government processes that have happened. I do where you actually go into a village and experience what it would have been like living there. I also do a Wagons West. Are we there yet? Because I want people to understand how they impacted the natives and what the people going across the country had to incur. You never hear wagons going east because nobody wanted to do it again. So I tried to bring history alive so people will learn it more. I want to save the culture and the language for this generation and the many more to come. I don't want to see third world reservations anymore. I want them to be sovereign nations. I want us to be more together like we were before the United States, where we actually work together as people. And I've never met a Native American that didn't help and want to help. So I'm just trying to help anybody I can by giving them this. These are all free.
Certainly.
I'll do any Zoom that you want. I'll even customize people's. I had one ask me for farming recently that was out of Texas, and it went to at least 12 states. And I did farming on sisters planting and everything else to let people know. They always say when this land was found, it was untouched, and that's the most untrue thing that I try to correct. When this land was found, it was totally environmentally managed by natives. So you didn't see our footprint over thousands of years.
Certainly. Now, of all the subjects that you teach on, is there a particular subject that you are passionate about personally?
No. I love doing anything on it and just taking people on journeys. I've never been a presenter or a speaker, but I've always loved storytelling. So if somebody's willing to listen, I'll come up with whatever story they want to listen to. I mean, in our Native Nation, stories were history. So I always try to confirm 3 different separate independent sources before I use it in my presentations.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of stories, I know that one of the topics you teach on is legends and myths. Is there any particular legend or myth you might be able to share with us this morning?
The legend that I share the most is the White Buffalo Woman, to get people to understand where the sacred pipe came from, and it's not a peace pipe. So I tell the in-depth legend of the Buffalo Woman, where she was sent down from the Creator, and White Buffalo Woman encountered 2 young Native men. One was not proper with her and was punished, and the other one was told to get the village ready, which he did. She came and presented and told her story of what God wanted them to know, presented them with the sacred pipe, and before she left, and she told them how to use it, what the specific instructions are. I tell people nothing was random with natives. It was always purpose. Everything was on purpose. She turned 3 times. Once she turned into a buffalo, and the last time she turned into a white buffalo, which she would come back, and that was supposed to be the time of the blue days and red days. So I try to explain how we thought. We weren't savages. We had governments. We had rules. We had rituals that were specific. There's no word for religion because it's spirituality. You're born with it. There's no word for linear. Everything's circular. Nothing ends. There's no word for inanimate. Everything is animate because it was created by the God, and so a piece of Him is in everything. So I'm just passionate about sharing.
Certainly. I really like that recurring theme that you keep talking about sharing with others. Now, I understand that you currently live out in California. We met, of course, at the Citizens Beyond conference in California that the Creek Nation hosted a few weeks ago. Could you tell us just a little bit about how you feel like the education landscape is like in California? Do you think it could be improved?
As far as for what people know of natives?
Yes.
Definitely. I hate to say that I think this is the worst state of treatment of natives I've ever lived in or ever been to. First off, they divide us. In 1953, when the termination legislation was enacted and signed in the federal government, there were a handful, like 3 or 5 states, that totally dropped there were any nations of natives in their state, and one of them was California. So in 1975, when we got our sovereignty back and you were able to have sovereign nations, California didn't have any nations to revive because they didn't recognize them. And to this date, they fight so many of them that are discouraged, downtrodden, and money's pouring out of them to try to get their sovereignty back. And California still fights them all the way. My son-in-law, I did research and can confirm what nation he's from here. But in 1853, California rolled 5 or 6 nations into one here and sent them to San Jose and gave them 5 acres and took the whole Bay Area. That tribe that they moved and consolidated still doesn't have sovereign nation yet. In California, they just made it where you can go to college here in the universities of California for free if you have an Indian ID. Most California nations here, I'm guessing about 50%, don't have that because California fights them on that. So what they did is they made up a fund coming from nonprofit to let those natives go for free, which seems insane to me. They also have one of the largest populations and no native hospital. Several casinos and still no native hospitals. They also treat you're 2 kinds of natives. You're either a California native or foreign. So California natives, where they do have certain care centers like in Sacramento that will give you specialists and things. My brother went up there because he needed treatment. He was literally denied and told that he was a foreign native and could not receive those services here. So we only get basic medical, basic dental and things, where if we were in Oklahoma, we'd get it all. We'd have a hospital and everything. So California, I'm not happy with because they have wonderful natives here that are trying hard to get back together and learn who they are and keep their cultures going, but they're being fought every way, and it's just breaking their hearts.
Certainly. Now, moving the discussion a little bit from California to Oklahoma, obviously there is a very big difference in those states and the Native American presence and representation comparatively. So critical race theory, now that is a controversial subject that appears in the public school system. Could you tell us a little bit about your take on CRT? Do you think that this is something that could accurately teach Native American history to students?
No. Because they don't know Native American history. How can they teach what they don't know? They think they know, but they don't. And I don't think that's the place for it. I really don't. When I send my kids to school, I want them to learn math, the basics, what they're thinking as far as who they are. I want that to come from us. That's what happened to us when we were being eradicated, when we were being moved. We weren't being allowed to do anything to keep our culture. When our children are being stolen at 2 to go to boarding school, to be faced with eating. In the 1950s, they did human experimentation, which included isotopes being put in oatmeal and served to different institutions, and some of them were the native boarding schools. They never told them this. So I know that some chiefs used to sit in the theater and laugh when they hear them called savages, because there's no word for savage in our language. No. I don't think, until you can learn and teach exactly what happened, no.
So then do you believe that on the responsibility of individuals to learn an accurate view of, what actually happened, regarding the history of the tribes in this country, is it up to the responsibility of the individual to seek out that history?
No. I think it's our nation is one of the best examples I've seen so far, not that I've seen everybody. We provide language learning for free. We provide history for free. I think it is us coming together as a nation and helping each other, not just independent nations, but nations together like a confederacy, that we need to learn our individual histories, how we work together, what impacted us, and then give that to our children. Legends and myths used to be history and events before the 1800s. It wasn't something supernatural. The natives used to, in the teepee or in their home, which is T means living and P means place, they would let the children go to sleep and then talk about history or events, knowing the children were listening without being told to pass it on. So passing it on, I feel, needs to go back to our life where it was legends and myths, which is history and events, and we tell them. We tell them the way our ancestors were told. To learn Native history, since it isn't out there, it'd be totally different if it was out there and you could go read about it in one book or do something, but it's not. It's not, and you'll never get it that way. People come to me all the time to look up genealogy because the nations, and I'm not slighting the nations, they just don't have the ability. They don't have the knowledge and the research it takes. From my decades of learning and all the government research I did because of my job, I know how to use government documents. I know how everything works. And I know how it formed through reading all this history. So now I can go in a unique way and figure out things from just a story. I've had 3 people come to me with a story that they heard in their family, and I have been able to give them the information to get into their nation.
Yes, indeed. We're a little over halfway through our program here, so folks out there, if you are watching, please start chiming in with your questions. I think we'll start addressing those here in just a couple moments. Another question for you, Ms. Sweger. What do you think, would you say, is the #1 Native American event or topic in history that is history gets wrong?
Who we are. Calling us savages or animals. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. They didn't take the time. I tried to compare it to people. If you landed in Europe and you heard everybody speaking, it would just sound like gibberish. Would you only call them Europeans, or would you try to find out what different nations they were? But you would try to find out you would ask somebody, are you German, are you French, and Italian? But nobody asks me when I say I'm Native American, what nation am I? Where did they come from? What happened to them? What's your language? Because everybody thinks us as natives when we're so much more than that.
So for you, basically destigmatizing the idea that we're a monolith, is that correct?
Yes, that's where I start. We're human. We had feelings. We had a life that was precious to us that was eradicated without even considering it at all. They didn't even consider, when you take over another country in history, they know what customs they had. They know they're eradicating them and they're trying to change them. Us, they just came in and said, hey, we're not going to get with you. You got to change, period. They were trying to teach us Christianity when we already had God.
Yes, indeed. So I want to start starting to address a question that we have here in the chat. It looks like there's a couple of submissions here. Actually, never mind. I apologize. But yes, so Ms. Sweger, also just kind of looking at your background in terms of where did you think that learning more about your identity as a Mvskoke, do you think that really contributed a lot to your research at all?
Yes, I did. It motivated me. I started my research by researching my own family, which I had never known anything back past my great-grandfather. I knew my grandfather my whole life, and he lived near where I lived. That was on my creek side. I have on my mother's side is Cherokee. I wish I could register in 2 nations, but federal government doesn't allow me. I learned so much about them that it inspired me to learn more about who we are that I never knew. My Lavinia is my 4th great-grandmother. She was born in 1795 in Goita tribe in Georgia. She didn't die till 1906 in Indian Territory. I think about all the time how much she saw in her lifetime. She went through the Civil War. She was part of the front end migration that was forced. She left in about 1832 to go to the Caddo Indians in Texas area, which then was in the middle of the revolution there. She married an Englishman that was a captain in that from the Georgia military area, which is the only state that sent help to fight the Texas Revolution. He was killed in about 1853, and they had a large, vast, I think 640 acres, a large home and everything, and she had 4 children. But once he died, she lost everything because Texas did not recognize natives as being able to own anything. So she went up to Indian Territory and was on the Steedman Road there. And then her son, Caddo, fought in the Civil War in the Honey Springs battle. He was part of North Fork and Fishertown, which is now underneath the lake in Eufaula. And so I follow them. I have a gap because his son, Ben, was born on the Freedman Row. So everybody knows what that means. He had a wife that was Seminole, but he had been through Melinda McGilvray, who was a slave of the McGilvray clan at the time. He was on the Freedman Row until he was about 18, and Caddo then took him off the Freedman Row and brought him over to the Muskogee Rolls. Otherwise, I'd still be on the Freedman Row.
Wow, that really is fascinating, isn't it?
He was born in 1867.
Wow, that's really inspiring when I hear about other people that not only explore Mvskoke history, but also their own family lineages as well. We do have a question here in the group chat. Do you feel that Native American genocide is taught or acknowledged academically at anywhere near the levels of the Jewish Holocaust? If not, should it be?
No, I do not believe it is recognized. I'll start there. When we were just a native continent, it's estimated there were 53 million of our nations here. So we had 53 million, and there was approximately 72 million in Europe at the time, before the 1462. By the time the Revolutionary War was over, it was down to a few 100,000. We were eradicated by removing. The reason they brought slaves in is because they took so many of us out as slaves that there weren't enough here. After the medieval, the plagues and everything, they lost their worker bees. So the nations were coming out for slaves at that time, and they would just pull up in a ship, invite natives on, and when they had enough, they would just leave. So families were separated. They never knew what happened to them. They don't know where they went. They brought diseases that had never been seen on this continent. And then they just killed us like animals. It was nothing. So in that short period of time, in 300 years, we went from 53 million to a couple 100,000. I don't think people know that. And then they went from that to even less to get us to Oklahoma. So, no, the genocide of the Indians are not known enough. And should it be? Yes. Now, I don't want to compare it to the Holocaust at all, because that was a different horror in itself. I don't think you can compare the two. It would be wrong, in my opinion, because the suffering is just as bad in each place. But I do think we need to be recognized more, and it needs to be known so we don't ever do it again.
I agree. I know that that's a very hard topic to certainly discuss. I think we're getting a little bit near the end here. Ms. Sweger, was there anything else that you would like to, any other topics or anything else that you wanted to discuss that we hadn't got to yet today?
I would love anybody to contact me and tell me stories if you have stories. I love giving help to people. If you know something in research or anything, I've been trying to help different nations here, different people, and I just want to continue doing that, so that I hope that someday it's like a pebble thrown into the water, that it's a ripple, that the next person will tell more people and the next person. When you ask me if I'm Native American someday, I hope I can say I'm Mvskoke Cherokee American and people will know what I'm talking about. I want to be able to say Hashi and somebody knows what it is or even recognizes. You know French and German when you hear it. How come you don't know native language when you hear it? We could still be code talkers because nobody's even taken the time. That was almost 100 years ago.
Yes, indeed. I think that is very important. And also, I just want to say, I think it's a very important topic that the important subjects that you are covering. Just one last question. How can people reach out to you if they want to seek a Zoom session or just share their stories with you?
It's pretty easy. Just contact me at my email, my name, Joy, Joy, Sweger, Sweger, @live.com. What else bothers me the most is the reservations that still exist and the poverty that they live in. There is a show that our people are doing now, that kind of reservation dogs, that kind of shows that a little bit. I try to enlighten people that the most missing and murdered are Native women. So I want that to never be, and I want to never hear third world country reservations. I want to put them into sovereign nations like we have.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that's about all the time that we have today. But Ms. Sweger, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I've had a great time, and I hope everybody's had a good journey today. And have a blessed day.
Mado, yes, you too. And for those of you out there that chimed in with your questions, Mado, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Now, we also have another live wire episode that will stream tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. right here. It will be regarding the University of Tulsa and boarding schools. We hope to see you then. In the meantime, have a great day.
Yeah. Oh.